Imagine staring across a battlefield, knowing you're outnumbered 2-1. Behind you lies your city, your family, your freedom. In front of you, the largest empire the world has ever seen. An army so vast that ancient writers claimed it could drink rivers dry and blot out the sun with arrows. Yet on this plain called Marathon, fewer than 10,000 Greek farmers, shopkeepers, and craftsmen stood their ground. No one believed they could win. But what happened here would shock the ancient world and change the course of history forever. At the heart of the Persian Empire sat King Darius I, the so-called King of Kings. His rule stretched across 3 continents, from Egypt's deserts to India's mountains. His armies had never known defeat. His wealth overflowed with the tribute of 100 nations, and yet, for all his power, Darius was obsessed with a handful of small, quarrelsome Greek cities. The reason? Years earlier, those cities dared to defy him. When the Greek colonies of Ionia rose in revolt, Athens sent ships to help. The rebellion was crushed, but the insult burned deep. Darius vowed revenge. In 491 BCE, his messengers arrived in Greece with a simple demand: surrender your land and water to Persia. Most cities bowed instantly, but Athens and Sparta, they didn't just refuse. They threw the Persian envoys into a pit. It was an act so outrageous, so unthinkable, that it made war inevitable, and Darius would make sure the punishment was severe. The Persian response was unlike anything Greece had ever seen. Darius assembled a war machine drawn from every corner of his empire: Persian immortals clad in scale armor, cavalry archers from the steppes, marines from Phoenicia who ruled the seas, and this was not just an army. It was a moving empire. 600 warships carried the force across the Aegean, a floating city of soldiers, horses, and supplies. Their mission was simple: burn rebellious cities, crush Athens, and reinstall Hippias, the tyrant Athens had once cast out. Island after island fell without a fight. But when the fleet reached Eretria, the defenders resisted. For 6 days, they held out, until betrayal opened the gates. The Persians slaughtered the city, burned its temples, and enslaved its people. The message to Greece was clear: resist and be erased. And now the Persians turned toward their ultimate prize, Athens itself. When word reached Athens that the Persian fleet had landed at Marathon, panic erupted. Some argued it was better to surrender than face certain death. Others whispered about abandoning the city and fleeing to the mountains. But then, Miltiades stepped forward. He wasn't just another general. He had once served under Darius himself. He knew the Persian war machine better than anyone, and he was convinced of one thing: if Athens tried to hide, it was finished. The only chance was to strike first. The generals were divided. Some demanded caution, others urged negotiation. In the end, the deciding vote fell to Callimachus, the polemarch. He sided with Miltiades. Athens would march to war. 9,000 Athenians gathered. Ordinary farmers and craftsmen turned soldiers, joined by 1,000 Plataean allies. Their shields were heavy, their spears long, and their courage untested. As they marched to Marathon, one runner was dispatched to Sparta, begging for help. But the Spartans refused. Bound by a sacred festival, they promised to come later. For now, Athens would stand alone. Section 4. Alone against Persia. The Athenians took their position on the plain of Marathon, staring across the field at an army twice their size. The Persians had cavalry, archers, and sheer numbers. The Greeks had little more than their spears, their shields, and the will to fight. For 4 tense days, the two armies glared at each other, neither willing to make the first move. The Persians knew time was on their side. They could raid, burn, and wait for Athens to collapse in fear. But Miltiades studied the land carefully. The marshes, the hills, the narrow plain. He saw something the Persians didn't. A weakness he could turn into an advantage. Still, the Athenians were restless. Every hour that passed brought new rumors, new fear. Would the Spartans arrive in time? Would Athens betray them and surrender behind their backs? Then came the moment Miltiades had been waiting for. The Persian cavalry, so vital to their strategy, was seen pulling away from the field. No one knows why. Perhaps a redeployment, perhaps overconfidence. But for Miltiades, it was the opening he had prayed for, and he was ready to gamble everything. Miltiades revealed a plan so daring, it bordered on madness. Instead of stacking his strongest warriors in the center, he did the opposite. He thinned the middle and reinforced the wings. To the Persians, it would look like whackness. But in reality, it was a trap. The idea was simple but deadly. Let the center bend under Persian pressure, then have the wings smash into their flanks. If it worked, the Persians would be surrounded. If it failed, Athens would cease to exist. At dawn, Miltiades gave the order. The hoplites closed ranks, shields overlapping, spears angled forward. But then came the move that stunned the Persians. Instead of marching slowly, the Greeks charged. 10,000 men sprinting across the plain in full armor, shouting their battle cry, closing the distance before Persian archers could cut them down. To the Persians, it must have looked insane. To the Greeks, it was the only hope. And when the two sides collided, the plain of Marathon erupted in chaos. The sky darkened with arrows as the Persian line unleashed its fury. Men fell, shields splintered, but the Greeks kept running. And then, with a thunder that shook the earth, the phalanx smashed into the Persians. The center strained under the weight of the empire's finest troops. For a moment, it looked as if Miltiades' gamble would break. The Greeks were pushed back, shields grinding against shields, spears snapping under the pressure. But on the wings, the plan worked to perfection. The Athenians and Plataeans crashed into the Persian flanks with unstoppable force. Slowly, the jaws began to close. The center bent, but it did not break. And as the wings wheeled inward, the Persians found themselves trapped. Panic spread like wildfire. Soldiers were crushed together so tightly they could barely raise their weapons. Thousands were cut down where they stood. Others fled toward the marshes and the sea, drowning in their desperate scramble to escape. By the time it was over, 6,400 Persians lay dead. The Greek losses? Just 192. It was a slaughter no one had believed possible. The survivors scrambled back to their ships, desperate to regroup and strike at Athens directly. But Miltiades wasn't finished. He forced his exhausted soldiers to march through the night, racing the Persian fleet. By the time the enemy appeared off the coast, the hoplites were already there, battered, bloodied, but standing firm. The Persians hesitated, then turned away. The invasion was over. For the Athenians, Marathon was more than a victory. It was proof that free citizens, fighting for their land, could bring down the mightiest empire on earth. It was the spark that ignited Athens' golden age, an age of democracy, philosophy, and art that shaped the world we live in today. Centuries later, when people spoke of courage against impossible odds, they remembered Marathon, a day when shopkeepers and farmers stood up to kings and conquerors and won. It was the moment history learned that sometimes David really can slay Goliath.